What is motivation? It's this unobservable inner force that moves us on a daily basis. We can say it's what energizes us toward action, and it provokes a behavioral response in response to the tension of an unmet inner need or goal. And when we say tension, the classic example of that is the rubber band, right? That the more you stretch it out, eventually when you let it go, it's gonna propel toward action, right? So the idea here is that when you have this is your actual state, you're over here, this is where you want to be. The further those pull apart, the greater the tension, and then the greater your likelihood to propel into action. Now, within that concept, we have a more specific concept that we can define a little bit more concretely, and that's motives. But they're what drives specific behaviors. We call them the reason for the behavior. And sometimes it's unknown to the consumer. Sometimes consumers themselves aren't really aware of their motives for a particular purchase decision, product usage. All right, so here's the big picture. Our motives are firmly rooted in our cultural values. Two categories of cultural values. We have individualism and collectivism. In some cultures, people are more individualistic, so they kind of think more focused on the self. And in some cultures, they're more collectivist, where they think of themselves in relation to their social group that they belong to, in terms of, I identify myself as part of this family, or as part of this society, or as part of this community. So different focus. And so depending on just that one category of cultural value, that's going to have implications for a variety of different motives that the person might have. Some of the motives that are listed here are from the Aguirre motives. So some of the motives there, in particular, need for autonomy. That's going to be very closely tied to whether the person has the cultural value of individualism or collectivism. Depending on what cultural background we're rooted in, that's going to largely determine our motives. And then those motives, they become more specific when we talk about them in terms of the goals that we develop on their basis. So let's just say that we are individualistic, from an individualistic cultural background. One of our motives is autonomy. One of our goals might be to be self-reliant. And then that would translate into more specific behaviors. What kinds of behaviors might a person who wants to be self-reliant enact? Would this person be content being 30, living with mom and dad? Probably not, right? That might make for a good sitcom, but not good for self-reliance. Out of the goal of self-reliance, a behavior that might come out of that is getting your own place, having your own apartment, a dorm room, a place to call your own, getting your college degree so that you can get a good job and rely on yourself. The cultural values create the motives, which reflect our goals, which then perpetuate and move our behaviors. Here are some of the renowned motivation theorists in the field of psychology. Freud, of course, everyone has heard of. Maslow, we talk about quite a bit in marketing. His hierarchy of needs is well known. McClelland and Aguirre. Freud, for example, his background was Austrian-Hungarian culture. That culture is very high in avoiding uncertainty and in there being large power distance between, let's just say, the haves and the have-nots, those with high social status and low social status. That reflects very clearly in his theory about human motives. The other three, Maslow, McClelland, and Aguirre, are actually from the US, and so their theories about motivation reflect largely the US culture, which is low in uncertainty avoidance. We're individualistic. It's a high masculinity culture. Their theory about motivation closely reflects that. The motives that we're going to be talking about today with regard to self-concept, with regard to Aguirre's motives, Maslow, keep that in mind, that this is bound within the context of the cultural background in which the motivation theory was developed. Very well applicable to US culture, what we're going to talk about today. It might have slightly different implications if we're looking at let's say, Chinese culture or a more collectivist culture. Important to keep that caveat in mind when we're examining a topic such as this that's so culturally bound. Another important thing to consider about motives is that they are present and they influence every stage of the consumer decision-making process. This is pretty much the standard as far as what's considered the key stages that consumers go through in decision-making: need recognition, search, alternative evaluation and selection, acquisition and usage, post-purchase evaluation. And then I've listed underneath some of the types of motives that influence each of these stages. Today we're going to focus on the acquisition and usage stage, which is where self-image or self-concept and Maslow and all the others are relevant. Consumers don't buy products, they buy motive satisfaction. Wherever there's an unmet need, an unmet motive, an unmet goal, that's where the product is useful. Consumers who buy a drill, what is it that they want? They want to make a hole, right? They want a hole somewhere. So you can't buy a hole, right? So they're buying a drill with the intention of getting that hole made, right? So that's what's important to remember, is that consumers they don't just want to have a product sitting around. They're going to be using it to achieve some kind of motive. So that's where the marketing strategy needs to make it clear that this product is fulfilling this particular motive, and of course make sure that the product actually does do the intended job. See, in segmentation, targeting, and positioning, both within and across cultures. So if we're talking about within the U.S. or across, so the U.S. versus Latin America versus China versus Europe, consumers do the same thing for different motives. This is where we get into the product-related need sets and how that relates to the motivation topic. Within the culture, that's the intracultural part here, within the U.S., something as simple as a watch has a variety of different usages which are linked to different motives. Status. For fashion, that might relate to self-esteem, the way the person feels about themselves. A particular product can satisfy a variety of motives. And the same thing goes cross-culturally. If we compare an individualist culture versus a collectivist culture in terms of what they would use cosmetics for. In an individualistic culture, we want to be unique, we want to be different. What might be some of the reasons why women use it? To stand out, to look different, to look more distinguished, more beautiful than the rest. Now, in a collectivist society, where it's looked down upon to stand out, the motivation is to connect with others and to feel part of your group, whether it's your family, in the workplace. It's a sense of community there. So what might be the usage of cosmetics? To blend in, to fit in, to be accepted. It's a different motive, same product. The basic functions are the same. Lipstick still makes your lips turn a different color, etc., but you're going to communicate about the product in a different way based on the motives. And then on the flip side, consumers, both within a culture and across different cultures, might do different things to achieve the same motive. For example, the status motive, depending on the culture, to demonstrate status. In some cultures, people might drink whiskey, whereas in others, they drink champagne. So a fine bottle of whiskey, of scotch, would be a demonstration of status in one culture, whereas in another, that wouldn't be considered high status, but drinking a glass of champagne would. We have two different things happening. Consumers doing the same thing for different motives, or doing different things for the same motives. Okay, then in terms of brand identities. The brand identity is how the corporation, the company, the firm designs the brand, including the logo, the symbols, all those things. It's the image that the corporation desires the brand to have in consumers' minds. The brand image is what consumers actually perceive. It's how they view the brand. It's their brand schema. It's what they have learned about the brand. Two sides of the same coin. The brand identity is from the firm's perspective, how they view the brand, how their strategy is intended for the brand to be viewed. Brand image is how it's received by the consumer. It's what they view, it's what they perceive. So in terms of the brand identity, it's designed to reflect the target market's motives. When you look at brands like Nike that have that just do it, be the best, that kind of positioning to it, those are reflecting certain motives, underlying motives of their target market. Okay. In terms of marketing communications, there's relevancy because motivation ties into consumer involvement. Involvement refers to whether a consumer is motivated to learn more about the product, if it's a product that's really of interest to them, that they really care about. Whether a consumer is highly motivated toward a product, we would say that it's a high involvement product for them. If the consumer's not very motivated, if it's, let's say, just an air conditioning, which, yeah, we all need it when it's hot out, but it's not something that most people are passionate about, that would be a low involvement product for that consumer. A consumer's motivation is what determines that involvement.